Welcome to the Tri-City Council special meeting of March 21st, 2011. May we have the roll call, Mrs. Bardana?
Mayor Schilling?
Here.
Councilman Beltramini? Here. Fleming?
Here.
Howard?
Here.
Kerwin? Here. McGinnis? Here. Slater?
Here.
Quorum present. This evening, our first item is a public hearing, and it is for Michigan Next Energy exemptions for United Solar Ovonic Corporation and also LG Chem Power. And Dino Macari, our city assessor, will present for staff before we open the public hearing.
Good evening, Mayor, members of council. As you may recall, Michigan Next Energy Authority was established in 2002, and they certify companies that do research and development of alternative energy sources. Those companies also qualify for 100% of our exemption on their personal property that they purchased. The law is also set to sunset in 2013, so next year would be the last year that they can purchase any equipment that will qualify for an exemption under this program. There's been another slight wrinkle in the law in that only the local unit of government and the local school district can opt out now. The county and all of their community college and intermediate school districts, they don't even have the option anymore. So it's just basically us and the Troy School District, and Troy School District is not going to opt out. They're going to participate in the program. This year, the companies are purchasing about $3.546 million in equipment. And the smallest, actually, which is a shot, goes to United Solar Ovonics, although they've got quite a bit of equipment of their own already. LG Chem, which used to be known as Compact Power, has two separate divisions in the building, and they purchased quite a bit of this equipment. The total exempted taxes for the 3 years remaining and that are available to these companies are about $43,682, and that includes the administration fee. They're also exempt from everything. This is about $14,561 a year to the city. That's the actual cost to the city of Troy. They have qualified for these exemptions since 2005, or yeah, 2005, I'm sorry, excuse me. The total now is about $205,500 that it's costing the city. To keep these exemptions in place, and again, they will expire at the end of 2012, and that equipment will go back on the tax roll. So at this point in time, you have the option of opting out, which means that you would levy your millage against this equipment, or continuing to grant the exemption that you've started in 2005 for these companies. And I will answer any questions you might have on these.
Questions for Mr. Macari before we open the public hearing? Seeing none, then we'll open the public hearing. Is there anyone here that wishes to speak on this item, which is the Michigan Next Energy exemptions? Seeing none, then I'll close the public hearing and bring it back to the council table for a resolution. Mayor Pro Tem Kerwin.
Resolved that the Tri-City Council hereby affirms the Michigan Next Energy exemptions of alternative energy person property located at 1100 West Maple and 1857 Technology Drive, Troy, Michigan, as certified by the city assessor in an amount not to exceed $3,546,997. A copy of which shall be attached to the original minutes of this meeting, and be it further resolved that the city clerk of the City of Troy shall forward a copy of this resolution and attachments to the Michigan Next Energy Authority at 3300 North Washington Square, Lansing, Michigan, 48913. Support.
Moved by Mayor Pro Tem Kerwin and seconded by Councilwoman McGinnis that we approve the resolution as printed and read. Discussion?
Madam Mayor,
Yes, Councilwoman Beltrame?
in the first line, it says exemptions of alternative energy person property. Should that be person or should it be personal?
Well, I would certainly like the exemption for myself, but quite frankly, yeah, you should make that personal. Excuse me for that error.
I would ask the clerk if we need, it's an editorial.
Right.
Thank you.
I think when Mary read it, you read personal, didn't you?
I read it exactly as written.
Okay. Any other discussion of this item? The vote then, Mrs. Bethauer?
Mayor Schilling,
Yes?
Councilmember Beltramini,
Yes.
Fleming,
Yes.
Howard,
No.
Kerwin,
Yes.
McGinnis,
Yes.
Slater.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Our next item for tonight in the special meeting is the review of the ICMA report. This is part 2, which has to do with the police operations and data analysis. Mr. Zerley?
Thank you, Your Honor, members of council. You've all met Mr. Craig Rapp with ICMA, who spoke about the first 7 elements of the ICMA report, which essentially was every department with the police department, as well as a salary and benefit. Mr. Rapp is back again, and he brought his team of Leonard Matarese, Kenneth Chels, and James McCabe to assist him in articulating the last police element. So with that, I'd like to turn this over to Mr. Rapp.
There's a lot of articulating to do, so the less you hear from me, probably the better. But I just want to take this opportunity to once again thank you for the opportunity to take a look in detail at your organization. As you'll recall, there were 8 elements, essentially covering a wide variety of services for the city of Troy. Elements 2 through 8 were presented at the last meeting that I attended, and we talked about the sustainability or lack thereof, depending on which department and which service. And tonight we're going to focus on the police department. I think it's fair to say that as we embarked upon this, as I mentioned the last time I was here, this was a fairly challenging undertaking for a couple of reasons. Number one, there was a very compressed time frame, and we have not only done all of the other elements within a very quick time frame, but the police department, and as you'll see through the presentation tonight, depends very heavily on data analysis and reconciling that data and then matching that up with staffing. Is a very intensive process, and we've again compressed the time that it would normally take to do that. The entire undertaking, both the police and the other departments, was meant to determine the sustainability of the services that you provide based upon what you had already done to approve the option 1 recommendation. If you recall, and as you know, the option 1 recommendation is a very aggressive reduction in force and services across all of the departments in the city. You've undertaken a variety of what I consider to be leading practices in a number of areas to do everything from outsourcing and privatization to hybrid solutions. But you've also laid off and are planning to lay off a number of people in a variety of additional departments. In order to make sure that you didn't end up, or to try to determine whether you would end up in a position where certain services would be unsustainable after that outcome, we looked in detail at your operations and made a large number of recommendations as to how you can best position yourself for the future given those reductions in force and changes in service delivery options. So this is the last of a series of analyses and recommendations, and I think as you'll see, once we come out the other end, assuming that you aggressively pursue the recommendations that we've made, with the exception of 11 positions across 3 different departments, you should be able to have a reasonable chance to maintain service delivery at a level that would be acceptable. Again, that's a judgment call, and I know that you're embarked on some of that additional analysis as we had recommended in the previous report. And I think it's very important that those efforts continue as you try to rebalance the organization for the new financial reality. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jim McCabe. I would mention that in addition to the 3 folks on the team who were identified here and who are here tonight, Bill Berger, a 4th member of the team, was also a very important part of that. He was just installed as U.S. Marshal in Florida, so speaks, I think, perhaps to the quality of our group, but I did want to mention the fact that he was part of the study team as well. So with that, Jim?
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, members of council. I regret not leaving putting Bill's name on there. I should keep my eye out in Middle Florida when I'm down there. But thank you again. And the way I thought we'd approach this is I have a brief PowerPoint presentation, about 13 or 14 slides. Myself and Ken Schultz will go over the main recommendations and findings from the report, and then open it up to you all. I'm sure you have questions. I see notepads and paper, so we're willing to entertain as many questions as that you might have. The way we approach this project, several different phases. Mr. Rapp alluded to the data analysis phase, collecting data from the CAD system, computer-assisted dispatch. We conducted numerous interviews of Troy PD personnel, conducted focus groups of Troy personnel on different levels of rank, cutting across different representations in the department. We did an extensive document review, and then operational and administrative observations, kind of unobtrusive observing the officers in their day-to-day course of their day-to-day duties. Overall, Troy PD is an outstanding police department. It's well managed. It enjoys the support of this group, the support of the community, and it's respected by its regional peers in the area. But note well that reducing the staffing to the levels that are being contemplated will also come a commensurate reduction in services, both from a short-term and a long-term perspective. In the short term, probably the most noticeable are service reductions to calls for service that we're recommending, and in the long term, diminished capacity to do long-term criminal investigations, both organized and reactive criminal investigations. But it's also important to note that what we're recommending is that the core services of policing in Troy will be sustainable. First off, looking at the crime experience in Troy. Here we have the U.S. and Michigan plus 11 other cities of similar size in Michigan, starting with Clinton Township on the top with 96,000 people, going down to Waterford Township with 70,000 people. Troy is nicely ensconced in the middle with 80,182. What we've done here is ranked these organizations based upon the violent crime rate per 100,000 and the property crime rate per 100,000. Violent crime is considered murder, rape, robbery, and aggravated assault. Property crime is considered burglary, larceny, theft, motor vehicle theft, and arson. You'll see that out of the 11 jurisdictions listed, Troy is 11th in violent crime out of these 11 jurisdictions. Now, stepping back for second. I'm not trying to compare Troy to these municipalities, just trying to put this in context with populations of similar size. You can see with a violent crime rate of 98.53 per 100,000 people, this is about 80% lower than the national average. So this is a relatively crime-free, violent crime-free community. Along the property crime column, it's ranked 8th. I would suspect, having not done any in-depth analysis of this, I would suspect this is driven by the 2 major retail establishments that are in the city that are driving that number a little bit. Probably, if you remove them, it would be ranked around 11th with the violent crime rate as well. Okay, so our recommendations are along 3 major areas: staffing and deployment, efficiency, and organizational modifications. And both Ken and I will unpack these as the slides progress. But the outcome at the end should be a leaner department with less specialization, with the core services maintained, but going back to the previous comment I made, a limited capacity to do some of the things that the Troy Police Department used to do. Okay, from a deployment and staffing standpoint, we took a very hard look at option 1 that the police department and the city put together. In my view, a very well constructed analysis of staffing and services in the city. We came off by 4 different, I'm calling it option 1 plus 4. We believe this is a very viable staffing model. We came at it from different directions. The city manager and the chief looked at a budget. And said, how many can we sustain with that budget? And we looked at it from a deployment and workload perspective and came out from an opposite direction. Based upon the work in the city, how many officers does the department need? And we come up with 97. Now, in order to ensure a smooth transition to this option, the time horizon for staffing reductions presented in option 1 should also be sustained. This is not like closing a conventional business where you can just shut down one piece of the operation and let the other pieces of the operation proceed. An orderly and smooth reduction is really the way to go. We're not talking about a regular business or industry. This is law enforcement and policing. People's lives, victimizations, so you don't want to do anything too drastic. So the slow and orderly progression that was laid out in option 1 is really the way to go. And, excuse me, thirdly, maintaining the 4 patrol shifts and 10-hour tours. In option 1, the reduction on the patrol side was for 3 shifts with 10-hour tours. In general, around the country, 10-hour tours are not the most efficient way to staff a police department. 24 hours in a day, 3 10-hour tours, you come up with 6 extra hours somewhere. It doesn't fit. So where do you put the extra coverage? Well, you know, the Troy PD is very good in analyzing the data and figuring out where to put the coverage, but 6 hours is not enough. A unique, and I don't think we've ever seen the 10-hour coverage that the Troy PD does, is that they stack 2 10-hour tours together. It's almost like having 2 20 that they can dial back and forth to meet the demand. It is a very well-constructed shift alignment. The problem is that when you reduce one of those shifts, then you weaken the entire model. Like links of a chain. If you weaken one link, the strength of the entire chain weakens. I think the experience over the last few months is the department saw that, is they reduced one of the shifts to 1 sergeant and 7 officers, and then quickly realized that that was not the right way to go, restaffed it, and strengthened the model from the 4-shift perspective. So leaving the 4 shifts the way they are with 10-hour tours, with that 2 sets of 20-hour movable shifts is the way to go. And Dr. Chels will talk about the exact times and staffing of those shifts based on the workload that is being experienced in Troy. So with that, I'll turn it over to Ken.
So, okay, I need that. Okay, we did a detailed analysis of more than going beyond calls for service. I mean, most departments around the country report large numbers of calls for service, large numbers of events, and it's often hard to translate what that actually means in terms of workload. So we looked at approximately 60,000 computerized records, and another of that total, about 32,000 of them are classified as calls. That does not include the entire work of the police department. There's of information that they record on a daily log that's a handwritten log that we didn't attempt to analyze. So this is all that's in the computerized systems. And the key that we look at is we look at every call, every activity that's recorded. We look at how many people were actually sent to that call, not just we don't just count it once. We look at the number of officers. We documented how often 2 or more officers, 3 or more officers went to different calls, and we located by time of day. And we did this primarily because it's very intensive. We take two extreme months. We take August and February typically to take a much deeper analysis of it because we want to compare it to the deployment level. And we break it down into different levels of types of calls. So we start out with what's called the other initiator, which is what citizen-initiated calls. Then there's police-initiated work, one of the things that we encourage. And then there's a category called out of service, which is a lot of paper writing and other activities. And those are the bottom levels that describe the workload in August. In the report, we have 4 charts like this. This is August on a weekday. On an average weekday, in the report, we have August on a weekend, and we have February on a weekday and February on a weekend. And this is a composite of an average of 4 weeks of data. So this is smooth based over 4 weeks of data. So the bottom 3 groupings keeps adding and stacking work. And then the top groupings is we differentiate the first line, the brighter green, is the regular patrol, but then you also have specialized units that do handle some calls for service, so we stack that on top of that as well. One of the recommendations will be a more streamlined concept of sharing. of not having as many specialized units. So this is the base workload, and we'll come back to this chart later on. So when we analyze the data, the February data and the August data, there were significant differences in terms of the average deployment. Weekdays in February were 15 and weekends were 12, and one of the recommendations is a more consistent plan across the week. And weekdays in August was 12.9, and weekends on average there was 10.6. Now this is the average across the day. There's a tremendous fluctuation. The average workload is an unusual way to represent. When we say 4.8, that means on average there will be 4.8 officers busy throughout the course of a 24 hours. Now as you saw in that chart, there's tremendous variability. Patrol saturation means that if you have 4.8 officers busy throughout the day and there are 15 units deployed, they're busy on average 32% of the time. That's what, of the computer-aided reported time. There's other time that's not included in that. But that doesn't reflect what happens throughout the day, so we look at what is the highest saturation level. And in February, there are points in the time when they're 55% or 50%, but because the deployment level is higher in February, that percentage is a little lower. When you look at August, the highest points were 60% and 70%, and those are the times of day when they had the highest. And one of the targets that is set is that, as a cap, is that 60% is sort of like an upper limit of utilization that you want totally dedicated. Because if you don't have enough time left over in reasonable chunks of time, you can't do effective crime prevention activities. You can't do crime prevention for 5 minutes and then go back to a call. You need substantial amounts of time. Now this is the recommended deployment, and this is what we would call the platoons. So when you see 2 sergeants and 16 officers between 6 a.m. and 1600 hours, only half of them will be on duty at any one time. And I'm often amazed that people say, well, why such a small percentage is on duty? Well, there's 7 days in a week. And if you're working 4 10-hour shifts, that's 4 days out of 7. And then if you add in vacation training, you end up with essentially 1 out of every 2 people on duty every day. So the 2 plus 16 turns out to be 1 sergeant and 8 officers, but there's a lot of overlap. And then at 10 o'clock, you bring on another 2 sergeants and 10 officers, and in time 3 at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and time 4 at 8 p.m. at night. Now what does this generate? It produces the new top line. The new top line is what the deployment would look like over the course of the day. And you can see The baseline is between 8 and 9 officers. You never drop below that, even in the earliest morning hours. And that's just a base level that you just want from a geographic perspective to cover the 34 square miles. Even if the workload doesn't demand it, you want a base level that you just don't want to go below. Everything else is approximately proportional to about 60%, that the total time, including out of service, that officers would be busy would be about 60%. Now, it can't be exactly matched. And the reason it can't be exactly matched is unless you're changing the number of officers every hour of the day, there's no way to align. In 10-hour shifts, and they overlap. So there's nothing you could ever do about this one point here. Now, when you have more than you need, and you know in advance you may have more officers than you need during this time period, you can do specialized patrol activities and plan for that, or do some types of training and things like that. So this gives you a sense of what the typical or average deployment would look like around the clock, and how it would compare to the workloads.
Okay, so from workload and staffing, we move into efficiency savings. First and foremost, one of our recommendations is to establish what we're calling a calls for service committee to examine the calls for service that are actually logged in Troy. Out of the 40,000 calls for service that come through the Troy PD in a given year, about 25% of them fall into 4 major categories. And these are the 4 categories that we have here. Routine medical calls, property damage only vehicle accidents, animal calls, and burglary alarms. Routine medical calls. Around the country, the notion of a police officer going to a routine medical call is not heard of. That doesn't mean that they shouldn't be trained in CPR and first aid. Doesn't mean that they shouldn't be available to go to cardiac cases, difficulty breathing cases, cases involving children. But from a routine sick case, there is no need to have a police officer respond. Property damage vehicle accidents. In general, property damage vehicle accidents are administrative. There is no need to have a police officer respond to a property damage vehicle accident. Now, there is a continuum from no response whatsoever to what's going on now is that every property damage vehicle accident gets a call. The reason for the committee is where in that continuum does the response go. For example, if you have a vehicle that just has property damage but is undriven, is not able to be driven, well, there's probably a role for the police there to direct traffic and secure towing. So that call really should be left up to a committee, possibly with input from the community, to determine where between we don't go at all to we go to everyone, where does that line get drawn. I know that the Troy PD is now in the process, I believe in April, of eliminating response to animal calls. And again, unless there is a dire emergency that the animal is threatening life or life, there's no reason to dispatch a police officer. And we know that 98% of all burglary alarms are false alarms. And we also know that the Troy PD over the last several years has reduced the number of burglary alarm calls that they go on. But still, they go on roughly 3,000 of them in a given year, and we still know that 98% of those alarms are false. So there is still room to go here. Going back a slide, this gray area here represents out-of-service work by Troy officers. In some cases, you can see it's the bulk of the work that's performed. Now, out-of-service work could be numerous things. It could be personal for meal or personal necessity. By report writing, administrative work, transporting prisoners, transporting people, animals, public relations activities, you name it, whatever the case may be. But there is a very large percentage of time spent by Troy PD officers out of service. We believe that's something that needs a very hard look that could be streamlined to a certain extent. And lastly, the notion of a generalist approach. Now, going back again to this slide, you notice that there is just one green area, where the previous slides had multiple green areas which reflected specialized units that were also working. Our recommendation is that, given the personnel cuts that are being proposed, that specialization is a luxury of times past, that everyone in the department, at least in the calls for service area, the patrol area, should be take a generalist approach. And the last major area are we're calling organizational modifications. And the first one is to eliminate the professional standards in the Community Services Division. This does not mean to imply that these functions should be eliminated. It's just the organizational structure. This whole division can be eliminated, and the duties of this current division can be shifted to elsewhere. For example, we're recommending that there's a new division created called the Investigations and Administrative Division that would largely take the investigations responsibility and most of the administrative duties that were done by the Professional Standards Community Services Division. We're recommending that the Special Investigations and Criminal Intelligence units be merged into one. Again, going back to that. consolidation and generalist approach, that the luxury of having one separate intelligence unit and one separate special investigations unit really needs to be kind of pushed together. Along those lines, we're recommending that you relocate the Directed Patrol Unit to the new Investigations Division. And what we know from around the country is that when you have intelligence, and long-term investigations, and special investigations, and Directed Patrol all working together under the same supervisor, and in this case it would be a lieutenant, the economies of scale and the efficiency that's created is just, it's a multiplier, it's a false multiplier. When you're gathering the information and then giving it to units on the street for proactive enforcement, who then can turn around and develop cases for long-term investigation, the three of those working together are like the strands of a rope, and it is a very, very, very effective combination of the three units. We're also recommending relocating the Community Services Unit to the Operations Division and closely aligning the activities of this unit with problem-solving and patrol operations. You have two major malls. I'm sorry, one's a collection, I think. A mall and a collection. I was told not to make that mistake. 80% of your serious crime is property crime. The Community Services Division should be front and center in dealing with those issues and dealing with the problems of the traffic and the crime in the malls and the congestion during the holidays, working with the schools. I believe option one calls for the elimination of that unit. Perhaps that's where we're four off on the personnel, is that this is an essential component on a police operation. They can be doing crime prevention, community services, working with organized groups, community groups, working with schools, you name it. It's just essential and absolutely needs to be there. Going back to the despecialization, we're recommending eliminating the traffic unit and eliminating the juvenile unit. Not to say that the functions of these units are dispensable. They're absolutely essential. It's just who does them now becomes the issue. Suggesting that the traffic unit and traffic enforcement can be rolled into the regular patrol function, and the juvenile unit can be transferred either to the investigations unit or perhaps to the community services section. Returning all the task force assignments. Troy has the luxury of being a partner with many federal, state task forces in the region. You gain tremendously out of that participation. However, in light of reducing personnel to the extent you're considering, you really need to rethink that and bring them back. Probably the only exception is the DEA task force, which participation on yields a significant amount of revenue sharing through asset forfeiture and the like. And then lastly, relocate the training unit, currently on John R. Street. Probably not a bad idea to bring it back into the building. There's ample space. Also reconfiguring the training, delivery of the training from full-day training to probably capitalizing on the overlaps that are currently on the patrol shifts. You could probably do it, hour blocks, 2-hour blocks, 4-hour blocks, make it a little bit more efficient in that sense. And this is say that these things haven't been considered by the Troy PD. Over the last few years, I know, in conversations with the chief and his command staff, that elimination of command positions, civilianization of personnel, consolidating units, looking for revenue sources. I mean, they're pushing it. And you know, I've watched in the last few months, particularly that change in personnel from I think it's the 4th shift, where they went from 1 and 7 officers, realized there was a gap and changed it back. The word I use is nimble. The management of the Troy PD is nimble. They're able to identify problems and address them quickly. This is not to say that these things haven't been at least explored or thought of, but when you're looking at a reduction of this size, combining the things that we're recommending here will go a long way, we believe, from an efficiency standpoint. So this is what the organization would look like. From a chart, I'm sorry for the small font, but it basically starts off here with the chief of police. Here, you probably, in the books that you have, this is an interesting position, which you label change agent, assistant chief, deputy chief, whatever the case may be, something of that nature, where this is the captain's position, and I know there's a couple of them, all of them in the room, so I've got to be careful here. The captain's position that we're eliminating because of these going from 3 divisions to 2 divisions. Change of this size, of this magnitude, is disruptive and can fall by the wayside if it's not managed correctly. The chief is not the change agent. However, somebody needs to be on top of all of the recommendations, whether ICMA recommendations or the up with yourself. Somebody has to be responsible on a day-to-day basis to making sure that they happen. This is an opportune position to be that change agent. And again, 2 divisions, the Investigation Administrations Division and the Operations Division with the patrol shifts, community services. And then here we have 1 lieutenant in charge of those 3 units that I mentioned before that work together very well. Professional standards and administrative lieutenant taking care of the other administrative units here, and the communications section all reporting to the 1 captain. So in conclusion, we believe that option 1 plus 4 for a total of 97 officers is viable. With a 2013-2014 timeline, gives the organization a chance to settle so that the change, as disruptive as it could be, will be minimized. We believe that maintaining the 4 10-hour patrol staffing level with the numbers that we had recommended will be more than enough resources to handle calls for service in the city. On top of that, exploring calls for service efficiencies under the items that we suggested, the burglary, the sick calls, the animal complaints, the routine traffic accidents, and then reorganizing under the general theme of consolidating, merging, and despecializing. And at the end, the department will be a little more reactive than it is now, a little less core services will be maintained, and really the bottom line is with the effective leadership that got you through this process already, we'll get you out of it, with core services maintained. And I'll be more than happy to entertain any questions.
Council, do you have questions on specific things in the booklet? And I'd like to start out by asking that I would have preferred in the report, you use the word eliminate in several sections, but then when you explain it, you say you're rolling in those into other. Wouldn't there have been a better way to word that so that people picking up the booklet and are looking at it online, if they zero in on that, they would really understand what is being said?
Well, I think your point's well taken, but the unit would be eliminated. The function, it would not be eliminated, but I understand what you're saying. But I mean, I guess could have another word have been used? Sure. But when I look at an organizational chart, from a bird's eye view, I'm eliminating units, wholesale.
Well, you could say that, but then you could go on, make it a little bit longer and explain exactly how it's being rolled in, because I wouldn't want people to think that we aren't going to serve those functions anymore.
Okay.
I'd like to have you explore a little bit is the comment that you have on page 23, which is talking about the 10-hour shifts in 4 shifts, and you've said the method in which Troy structures the patrol staffing department is excellent and rarely seen in this country.
That's right.
I think that's significant. Would you like to clarify that a little bit more?
Well, rarely is probably a bad word too. It's not seen in this country. Is that the way 10-hour shifts are generally deployed is one of 2 ways. They're either 3 10-hour shifts that have a 2-hour overlap,
Right.
or it's just a standalone, what's sometimes referred to as a power shift, where it's just a freestanding 10-hour shift, usually at night, maybe from 4 o'clock p.m., 4 p.m. to 2 in the morning, to overlap on top of regular patrol. The 3 10-hour shifts is almost universally frowned on because the inefficiency of those 2 methods that I just mentioned. Troy PD, in my view, is unique in the way that they stack the shifts, as I was trying to explain before, is they take 2 10-hour tours and align them next to each other. So you basically have 2 20-hour, and they can move them, and they do, every whatever the case may be. Analyze the data. When are the calls for services happening? When is the crime happening? And they can move them. And it's really a well put together model.
Will that efficiency of doing it in that manner still be there when we have less numbers of staff?
If I may, what we did. is a reflection of that. Now, this is the time, 6 in the morning to 4 in the afternoon. We're recommending 1 lieutenant, 2 sergeants, 16 officers, and so on. And what you get is the deployment through the day. So here at midnight, you have 14 officers working, and this is the deployment through the day. And this is the demand. And it's a very, it leaves ample room for the directed patrol activities that are necessary, traffic enforcement, community policing, whatever the case may be. I wish I would have. I wish I could take credit for the way it was created, but it's quite well done.
Councilman Beltrame?
I just want to follow up on this. Your recommendation was for the lieutenant gap to be late in the afternoon, over evening rush, as opposed to the middle of the night. And I was curious, knowing that the middle of the night is our least heavy shift, if you will, why you chose that time frame for the lieutenant gap.
It's exactly because it's the least busy time.
It's not, though.
Well,
You chose it. You chose the lieutenant gap if you do all of that out from like 4 to 10.
Well, from our perspective, having a lieutenant into the wee hours is a good thing because of the, what's the expression? An idle mind is a devil's playground. So So when you have the hours between 4 o'clock to 8 o'clock, there's command staff is present, the chief is still in the office, the captains are around, there's more eyes. So this gives you more command staff or executive managerial, if you will, coverage throughout the day than otherwise.
So at evening rush, you're expecting management to pick up any slack that might be necessary here.
Well, this cadre of people, the sergeants and the officers, are really the workhorse.
They're great, I know.
No, what I'm saying is that the lieutenant is not necessarily, responding to calls or managing any of the work. They're more a managerial position. So where you want the managerial position, we tried to lay it out as best as possible, with the understanding of having people in the middle of the night is probably more critical than having them in the middle of the day. And the other thing is that there were more officers to supervise. So the lieutenant's function would be more appropriate there.
I have another question.
Okay, go ahead.
I need to have the Excel chart. I mean, quite honestly, I did not understand this chart at all, and so I figured I can't understand it.
You're speaking of the...
90th percentile chart.
Okay.
I don't understand how the 90th percentile is 33 and then all of a sudden it's 12.
Okay.
So, Dr. Schultz.
Uh-oh. Sit. I have some friends in Detroit PD.
And Councilman Beltrame, what page?
I don't know, I didn't have page numbers.
Okay. Okay.
It's figure 54.
Figure 54. Okay, so it's a response time.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Most people,
119.
in the vast majority of data analysis, use only one measure called the average. And that's a misleading measure. So one of the ideas that you want to look at is, on some level, what's the worst, how bad do things get? The 90th percentile means that 10% of the calls take longer than that, and 90% of the calls I reach before I get to that point. So I want to give you a sense. I don't want to take the worst case scenario, you know, the absolute worst response time I ever have, but I want to give a sense of beyond the average, and that's called the 90th percentile. So let's take that chart, figure 53, and let's take in February 2010, 90% of the calls had a dispatch delay of 7.9 minutes or less, but that also means that 10%, I'm just looking at the last row, I'll focus just on the last row. So that in total, in February, 90% of the calls had a dispatch delay of 7.9 minutes or less, but conversely, 10% of them took more than that, like 8 minutes or more. Yeah.
Where did you get the 7.9? That
I'm
doesn't-
meaning okay, 1 second, maybe we have a different. Okay, so we're looking at. Okay.
I don't have a 7.9
Okay,
at all.
again.
That's my problem.
Okay, so let me. Okay, so it's in, okay.
Bottom is.
Okay, I have a different. That's figure. I was looking at figure 53. I was looking at this figure. Okay, so let's look at. I'm sorry, figure 54. I'm sorry. Okay, so let's compare the two numbers. On figure 53, we gave the average. The average was 7.9 minutes. But on figure 54, we're saying a significant portion of time it can take up to 22 minutes, and 10% of the time it takes more than 22 minutes to dispatch a unit. That's what that number is telling you. We didn't do a detailed study to understand what's the dynamics going into dispatch operation. Travel time, the average was 7.2 minutes. The 90th percentile was 13.4 minutes, and total response time, the average was 15 minutes in February, but the 90th percentile was almost 33 minutes, the last line.
I have that.
Okay, so what's,
But-
so the 90th percentile is much, much longer than the averages.
I guess my question is, how if 33 minutes is the 90th percentile?
But that means 90% of the time they get there in 33 minutes or less.
Yes. Then how do you go on and say, because contrary to what you just said, 90% of the time they get there in 33 minutes or less.
Yes.
That's how I understood this.
Right.
But you go on to say, means that 90% of all calls were responded to in fewer
Okay, I understand.
See, my,
I understand,
so explain it, please.
no, it's that number is wrong, it's a typo, that's not, okay? The 12-minute number is a typo, unfortunately, it's unfortunate. That's why you would have trouble understanding it?
2 hours I tried to understand.
Yeah, the good news is I know enough to know whether it's a typo, and unfortunately it's a typo. So that's why it would have made no sense.
And the other piece of this is, when most of us think of 90%, we think of that toward the good.
Right.
And in this case, it's 90%
Right.
is toward the bad,
Right,
toward
'cause-
the worst.
I mean, the people who started the concept of a 90th percentile, police departments are not traditionally thinking those terms. The EMS always think that way, and fire services always think in that way, because they really are concerned about, in EMS, there is a threshold of 6 minutes or 7 minutes in brain dead, so they really want to know what is that 90th percentile. So we've said that we'd like to look at that number in a police environment, even though it's not traditionally looked at, because one of the things we know is, one of the number one things that people complain about is, why did it take so long? So it doesn't do any good to say, well, on average we get there, but you're not part of that average group. You're part of that group that got a 33-minute response time that was much longer. So we want to give a sense of how often that happens. We used to actually give a detailed chart that showed the 80th percentile. That just drove people crazy. So we stuck with just the 90th percentile, but I apologize for the mistake, because that would drive anyone crazy. When you read it, the sentence says, continues right, and then there's a number that would drive anyone
Well,
crazy.
see, and I didn't know which, I mean,
I understand.
I looked at it.
Right, yes, it would have been extremely problematic.
Yeah,
And my PhD doesn't explain it either.
neither did my husband's.
Okay, good.
Mayor Pro Tem Kerwin, did you signal next? I wanted to ask.
I guess I'm going to go back to, this would be page 11 if you were looking at recommendations, council members. And it's to the mayor's point about eliminate, 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 because really, as you go through it, you talk about establishing a panel to review. And so I guess that's where the disconnect is. This is so, you know.
Sorry.
Okay, so that would be a suggested change. Did you want to say anything?
Oh, no, go ahead.
Okay. The second point that you make, and again, this is on page 12, which I think is important, not just for the police department, but for all of us here. It says in the paragraph after all of the recommendations, a clear and consistent message must be embraced and communicated to all members of the department that things must change, old ways of doing things are gone, job descriptions and responsibilities are different, and more is expected. And ICMA has done part one, and this is part two, but in general, that is what the message is,
Yes.
that those old ways are gone and the difficulty with that.
Correct.
In part, that's where you suggest a change agent
Correct.
actually be a go-to person. Did you have a change agent in terms of part one?
I did not. Perhaps,
I can respond to that. The answer is yes, we did. And we even wound up, thanks to the ERA program, saving money on it. Mary Redden had a title of assistant to the city manager. She was brought up to the ranks, did a very good job in executive support, but that title normally denotes someone with a master's degree that wants to be a city manager. So I was able to, without adding personnel in our office, hire Monica Ireland, who used to intern for us, as an administrative assistant to the city manager, train her, if you will, to become a city manager, and her title also incorporates the position of Director of Continuous Improvement or Coordinator of Continuous Improvement. So the answer is yes. We've already done that in the first 7 elements.
So one thing that was suggested is a timeline for this, and the change agent, whomever would be selected for police or whomever would be selected for management, would have that specific timeline. It was shorter for part one. Part two has a way. I think what we'll be expecting next from both would be a list of the procedures on the implementation. That's really where the rubber meets the road. This can't be another Zucker report where we get the ideas and change must happen, and then there is that slow response. In terms of the mayor's point, someone could read this and be quite concerned about elimination. I think it's important, and Mayor, you were stressing that, in fact, later on in the report, it suggested that some look at the calls for service and analyze exactly where that would be, so that even though we've already passed about animal control, in terms of other response things, that elimination is more harsh at this point in terms of what was suggested in the report, that some committee look at all those calls for service and try to figure out a way to do it.
Okay. And I noted, I didn't see it written in here, but when he was talking, he said with a 2013 and 2014 timeline. So it's not immediate. Just as in the other report, some of the things have already started to be implemented in part one. And there will be some things, I'm sure, in this report they've already indicated that we've already started doing. But the timeline's important for people to understand so they know
What to expect.
what's going to be happening. And I was just looking for clarity when I brought up those things about the wording, because people will read it without hearing the explanation, because some people will go online and, get the report, and they need to have that, too. Who else has a question here, or comment? Council members? Who's signaling next? Councilman Fleming?
Yes. On your page 11, on the organizational modifications of your slides there, I was having difficulty in page 11. Well, all of these things here. And then the organizational chart that we have. I was having difficulty in my mind. We say we're eliminating these things, taking the walk from where we are today in an organization, what's changing to
Okay.
get to this. I'm
Sure.
wondering if there's a chart that could be generated that we could take that walk, because we talk about these, but these are people. And I'm trying to look at the existing organization, get to this one, incorporating those changes, and how do we highlight the changes on an organization chart?
That's doable. I apologize, I don't have that now, but looking at the organizational chart, I think the option one of the big things is that it doesn't include this here, the community services unit. I think that's a big missing. I believe this configuration here, as I spoke about the efficiency and the economies of scale that you get by combining those three under one individual, is not specifically delineated in the option one chart. And again, the elimination of an entire division is not there. So it's streamlined from one captain basically covering this and the other captain covering this. So it tightens it up from a span of control perspective. We think the operational efficiencies here are more powerful, and the combination, the addition of the community services. Other than that, I believe that most of what's here also is on the option one organizational chart. And what we can do without any difficulty is put them side by side and then lay that out for you so you know exactly what's being moved, what we're recommending moved.
Okay. Wade?
There's also, on page 11 of the report here, it talks about eliminating the captain's position.
Yes.
But did I see,
Yes.
talk about that a little bit, but we still have the 3 captains here on the final organization.
Yes, well, eliminating the captain's position in charge of the division.
In charge of
And
the-
then, long-term, I mean, I don't know how long the captains are going to be here, but long-term, there's only a need in the Detroit PD for 2 captains.
Gotcha.
Councilman Slater, did you want to go next? Councilman McGinnis? Councilman McGinnis?
I'll go away.
You were both signaling, so.
I think the issue with using the word eliminate here is that it gives the impression that we're going to cut out these pieces of the pie and yet still operate in the same way. But I think before we even really talk about this, it's more important to emphasize, and you did mention it, but I think the report does a great job of emphasizing the mindset going from specialization to something that's a lot more generalized. And so when we're talking about making those changes to the structure, really before we can sign on to do any of these things, because the only way we can operate and be sustainable is if we make that change first, because then we're making these changes. But there are other things that are in place that will be able to pick up the slack and not to keep us at the level that we're at. But I think it's the way that it's outlined here, because it's the way that people view each one of these components, that the first thing we have to understand is that, for instance, a lot of these things that are recommended to be merged or to be dissolved, they're actually, the responsibility is being placed back into your patrol units. And you talked a lot about in here how it would be a totally different concept. Well, not totally different. I'm sure it operates somewhat this way depending on the group of officers or the platoon. But the way that you would handle these types of things would be through a team-led enforcement, which is really a group of officers, smaller, not with the ability to do the same things that they are now, but operating in a different way. So it's kind of absorbing a lot of these things that we're using the word eliminate to.
Well, you're absolutely right. But, I'll go back to the reason why I chose the word eliminate, because, if these recommendations are adopted, they will no longer be a traffic unit. They will be eliminated. So, I understand the point, and I think if somebody read this without hearing the editorial version of it, I think you're right, and I have no objection to that.
And the other thing,
Mr.
No,
Zernick,
I never want to get in front of my bosses, so I'll wait.
but you wanted to explain
I
something
did,
here.
but-
well, the other thing too, I think, is just that will also refer back to leadership. And getting everyone on board,
Yes.
which I think you spoke a lot about, or 3 or 4 of you spoke a lot about in the report, is that in order to accomplish those things, you have to make sure that people that work in the department buy into it. So, I mean, that's something that I think needs to be stressed very much in terms of making this transition.
Well, one of the big things with change is two ingredients, so the change agent and uncomfort or discomfort with the status quo. And I think through the course of the last months, years, the status quo is unsettling, and people will change. They will change. And when you eliminate a traffic function, it doesn't mean that traffic enforcement won't be done or just will be eliminated from Troy. It just means that somebody has to step up and say, well, it's 3 to 6 in the afternoon. We need to do traffic enforcement. So that isn't the traffic unit job anymore. It's now the sergeant or the lieutenant that's working those hours. And you're right. It's about leadership and saying, all right, well, we used to do it that way. Now we've got to do it this way. So let's all get a hand on the rope.
Mr. Zerlak?
Just as a point of possible clarification, it's up to you and the city council if you like the terminology, but in the first 7 elements, and using the office of the city manager as an example, I had 2 assistant managers. And the report in the first element doesn't say eliminate Mr. Mark Miller's position. It says to restructure and redeploy. The position's gone in terms of a table of organization, but he's been redeployed. And so perhaps instead of the word eliminate, you'd have a unification with all the elements using the same terminology. Craig shaking his head, yes, of restructuring, redeploying. That might solve the issue. Harshness.
I had no objection to changing it in the first place. I agree. I don't have a problem. I think you're all right.
Councilman Slater, you want to go next?
Could I ask some CAD questions?
Yes.
Could you give me your impression of the CAD system here compared to other data-driven CAD systems that you
Okay,
looked
so,
at? Do you think it's accurate? The information was accurate that came out of there for you?
we do reasonable amounts of checks, but the only way you can really do an accuracy test on the CAD system would require actually to have people sitting in the dispatch room for days and days and days, and we made no effort to do that. So I can attest to that level of accuracy. But that's not enough to verify the data. I mean, to give you an example, and I can't mention the city, we documented in another city that 40% of the time the arriving officer did not report on scene. So we do lots of checks to look for consistency and to see where problems might arise. But the only way to know about the accuracy is you actually have to have people, supervisors, double and tripling checking, and there's a man laughing in the corner because we did that literally in the city of Detroit, and we brought everybody in the room and we listened to recordings. I had a union rep, so I can tell you what it takes to do it, and we did that every week. But it took 50 man-hours every week to find out what was wrong with the Detroit's CAD system. So you're in much better shape. As best we can tell, we didn't see anything that stood out, but it's not the same as actually sitting there and listening and trying to understand. Our officers pushing the button appropriately. I mean, that's the real issue. Are they letting it know appropriately or not? And that requires. But given the level of supervision and everything we know about your police department, we have every reason to believe that that would be an accurate assessment. There's an image that's formed based on the professionalism of the department, and as best we can tell, that would not be an issue.
Okay. Great. Right.
Councilman Slater, go ahead.
You know the gray area on the chart?
Right.
That you indicated you weren't sure what
Out of
the out-of-service work, what may have driven that to be what it is?
Okay, so we've looked at the data, but the question is how detailed do we go in terms of what the real driver is? And
Perhaps
Could that be a technical?
Oh, without a doubt.
Without a doubt,
Perhaps,
it's
it's maybe not the CAD system that you're
Yes.
concerned about, the Clemens system might be the one.
Yes.
Yes, that could definitely. Factor here. Just, the brief time that we were here, the amount of time it takes to enter a report into the MDT on just the simplest of traffic accidents. I think the average in one of the charts is about an hour. It's an hour to handle a traffic accident, and that is driven largely because of the cumbersome nature of the system. And, and Detroit PD and all the officers are aware of that. It's just that they have. And yes, that could definitely be a driver of that large gray area.
Okay. You indicated that with putting I think it's with putting the 4 sworn positions back into the model, that would be a total of 97 officers?
Yes, I believe so.
That takes us back to our 1978 levels of personnel.
I was not aware of that.
I just checked with the chief to clarify that. Is that Chief Mayor?
I started in '79. That's right about where we were at, 1979.
And my concern is with going to that number of officers for the size city that we've grown and developed into, you're saying that that is sustainable.
Yes, that's right.
But it would not be at the level of service that people have come to expect.
That's
because
right.
there will be no specialization areas, so they'll see a different service, and of course we'll still be responding to, the emergencies and things of that nature. How soon would people, either residents or business, people see a change?
Well, it's hard to say. And there's been comments, about the nature of doing this by committee and not necessarily eliminating and cutting. So it really is contingent upon you guys, on what you decide are services that you no longer require. So it could go from drastic. You could eliminate 25% of your calls to service next week. But that's not an advisable way to go. You're better off, again, looking at a timeline over a number of years. And let's visit this. Let's look at what calls are here. Let's look upon what services we provide now, and tweak it. Let the agency attrit, and then it's a moving target. And eventually, if you learn in 2 years that this is not sustainable, then you haven't cut. You're able to get it ramped back up without suffering much damage. So it's hard to say. It's hard to say what services are going to be noticeably gone and what people won't notice, because it's up to you guys what you decide to cut.
Thank you.
I'm sorry for the vague
No, it's
answer,
all right.
but it's...
Mayor Tim Kerwin?
I have a couple questions, so I could come back, because I know that one of our council members hasn't been able to ask a question yet. But one is on Clemis, but this other one is on specialized units, because we really are known for our specialized units. And I'm wondering if you took into account, and perhaps Craig would want to answer this, I don't know him, but we are close to an international border, and we are close to the ring city. Those are two elements that wouldn't fall into this is what a general police can. Those are two things that concern me. Our relationship with ICE, which I think is really important, not trying to continue that specialization, but those are some specific areas regarding safety that are unique to a city located so close to a major urban area and an international border. I'm wondering if perhaps Craig would force.
Want to go first? I can certainly speak to that.
Anyone.
Yeah, I was going to hand it mostly over to Jim. I think that just tying it back to the previous comments, I think that what you're struggling with, and what I'm just thinking here, sort of links back to what we were talking about in the previous report. You're moving from an environment where you have X number of people doing X number of things in a way that you traditionally have done them. And we have suggested, and we're suggesting in this report, that through certain types of improvements to the way that you do work, and it's not just a few things, it's a lot of things, you can in fact deploy and react and serve in ways that will approach what you're doing now. The first step of which, and this was exactly what we said in the previous report, the first step of which is to say, you have an array of services here. You're not going to be all things to all people in the future, so you need to start identifying which things are either going to not be done or done less frequently or in a slightly different way. Now, there are specialized units, or there are multi-jurisdictional task force and other things, and I don't think that you're completely walking away from that, which relate, and I won't try to answer that part of it. I'll answer that for Jim. But the point of this is that in general, you're using additional, more modern, and many of these things are going to be done through the good work of your own existing staff as they tweak and think through and brainstorm new ways of doing business. And so we're trying to give you a way forward to transition through that, and instead of saying, I think the good news is you might not be under enough pressure so you have to do it in 3 months or 6 months. You probably have some luxury of doing it over a period of time. And I think that's exactly how it should be.
To dovetail on that, I'm a fan of participation in task forces. I'm not suggesting that they don't bring add value to the department, by all means. But the backdrop is, what do you do with the ones that you have left? And I think that's really a luxury that can't be sustained under this model that we're recommending. But again, to your point, in this area here, this is the Special Investigations and Criminal Intelligence Unit. Right now, the Special Investigations Unit has people from other jurisdictions working on it.
That's right.
So I'm not suggesting that we get rid of them, but perhaps instead of us going out or you going out, perhaps they come here in greater numbers. Because Troy enjoys a very, very high reputation in this region. So if the people in this community, not this community, in this region knew that Troy was now all of a sudden going to be out of that game, that regional game, there might be more willingness to partner up and come here. So this might actually work in to a certain extent.
I'd like to call on Chief Mayor to shed some light on this particular area for us, would you?
Sure, I had 3 points that I want to address, Mayor, just to kind of clarify some of the things we've discussed so far. Councilwoman Kerwin asked about a change plan. Through talking to captains, I've appointed Captain Mott is going to be the captain in charge of this process. She's already, over the weekend, she submitted to me a several-point plan as to what she's going to start implementing in the first 6 months. So we're well on the way with this. We have the benefit of having training in this area, so we're looking at that. Councilman Slater asked a question about the CAD accuracy. The CAD information we supplied is accurate. We were extremely surprised when we got the information. We were very unhappy with the way the information looked. The information is accurate that they have. What we discovered as we went through and analyzed it is the way that the CAD system is set up, it doesn't differentiate response times. For example, a home invasion in progress and a home invasion report. Now, that's the information that they got is accurate. I'm not disputing their information. It's an in-house error that we had based on the system. We didn't realize that. We don't get complaints on response time at Troy. So it's not an area of concern because we don't get complaints. Operating under this theory that everything's going fine, people are happy, we're not getting complaints. We're going to have to delve into that a little bit more. Also, it became really obvious that keeping the electronic activity logs and the paper activity logs hurt us in the sense of it made it appear on the one chart when you look at the workload, the officer-initiated workload isn't represented. Now, they have accurate information. The information we supply is accurate. I'm not doubting that information. What I'm saying is we got to change the way we keep that data, and we will change that. We'll have a more accurate reflection in the future. So they have good electronic information, as Mr. McCabe indicated. They know, and Dr. Chelsea did also, they know that we've got paper logs. That isn't shown on the reports we have. Through nobody's fault, just something we didn't realize. The other item regarding the Columbus system is has been addressed by yourself when you asked the question on some of the time lags there. We definitely have a connectivity issue. The MDCs in the car connect through cellular towers. We're very fortunate to have the Somerset collection and other areas that have a lot of people that go to them. Well, they bring their phones with them. It's our belief that that bogs down our system because it puts a demand on those towers. And we're working with Columbus. Columbus is working out there as frustrated as we are to try to fix that. Part of the other problem we have is the records management system we currently have was designed for data purposes. It wasn't designed for ease of entry by the police officers. Columbus is correcting that. I've been in touch with Joe Sullivan, the head. Indicates that Auburn Hills is currently, this week, they started testing a new records management system, so that should take care of some of those problems. And they're going to roll out a online citizen reporting method where citizens go online and make police reports the third quarter of this year. And that's up on Troy and Novi, insisting that we get something like that done, so they've been receptive with that. So those were just three of the issues I want to address. Did you want me to address the task force issues? I
Yes,
think Mr. McCabe
I think
is
that's
addressing.
where Mayor Pro Tem Kerwin was going about the safety issue.
And our alliances.
We've got, as indicated, we have a very good reputation, so we were able, for example, the example Mr. McCabe gave us with our Special Investigations Unit, we went from being 4 police officers from Troy and 1 sergeant to now 2 police officers from Troy, 1 sergeant, an officer from Auburn Hills, and an officer from Bloomfield Township. So we've got, we save 40% of our costs, but the unit efficiency has probably gone up because now we got more police departments providing information and data. With the other task force that we have, like ICE that you mentioned, that gives us an expertise. We have officers that we can call on for other activities, and we get more intelligence information that comes into our department on those types of crimes, the immigration custom enforcement. So the other benefit of that is we train officers and they come back in to work, and it helps us to have more highly trained and qualified officers, and it helps us to recruit other officers because they can see you can come to shore. Assignments. We've got ICE, we've got the narcotics enforcement team with Oakland County, which helps us deal with narcotics enforcement on a countywide basis. And then you mentioned the Drug Enforcement Agency. We've got a very good relationship with them, and as Mr. McCabe mentioned, that does help us with something that makes Mr. Lambrado very happy, bringing in money that we can use to buy equipment and that through forfeitures.
So when we go to the generic, you'll be analyzing that through your change agent and looking at each one of those to see how this can be rolled over and the best retained and those relationships continue? Is that your intention?
That's exactly our intention.
Okay. Is the position isn't going to be called change agent, I hope? What's it going to be called? We have a better wording?
It's an administrative captain for special services. We're going to come up. I was waiting for Captain Mott to
Come up with a
settle
good
the
name?
term.
Okay. Because just as we were talking about using restructure and redeploy instead of using the word
We're open for
eliminate here,
suggestions,
because I think that our goal is to have a readable document for others who are not in the law enforcement community to read and understand what is being recommended and what we're going to do. Other council questions here, either for, yes, Councilman Slater?
Bring up the deployment, there was,
That one?
is there a deployment one with? There you go. Really what you're doing is giving a guideline.
Yes.
So if the administration thought that possibly the lieutenant should start earlier or do something, we're not taking discretion away from the administration here. So if they thought that it should start at 1900 instead of 2000,
Well, all of this.
you're just, we gave you kind of a bottom line.
Right.
And you looked at the bottom line and thought, what would be the best way to get to the bottom line?
Well, actually,
Option one.
Well, actually, the other way around is we looked at the workload to determine what the bottom line should be.
Could be.
Could be.
Could
Could
be.
be.
And then this is what we came up with. And it just so happens that we were very close to what option
So
one
whether
was.
you had option one or not, this is probably what you would have come up
Correct.
with?
Other questions from council? Councilman Beltramini?
I'm a visual learner, so the charts are important.
I'm glad they're on his end, so he can.
And I do have some
But
issues
you
with
wear a
some of the
bulletproof
charts.
vest, and I've only had it once in Detroit.
I just was curious, and I am tickled. I do believe the citizen reporting, and those, in fact, the chief and I have talked about that. And having come back from a national meeting last week, I know that other communities are looking at these kinds of things to do, and some have them in. And I've shared that information. When you looked at your percentage of events per day by category, and you came to your conclusion in your observations, I found it interesting that a higher percentage of events were actually investigative events than were crime-related. And yet it was the crime-related that you cited. And so I wondered why you made that distinction, because the investigations had a higher percentage of events.
Okay. First of all, the word investigation shouldn't be confused with an investigative unit.
I understand.
Okay. Generally, the thing that people are most interested in looking at is what's going on in terms of crime and how much of your time is spent on crime-related activities. So that's why it's always highlighted, even though it's a small, in every city we've ever looked at, it's always a small percentage. But it's the type of thing that people want to know, how much time are my officers spending on crime-related activities. So that's why it's always highlighted, not because it's always the largest number. So I don't know if I've answered your question or not.
Yeah.
Okay, so
a more popular item to talk about, in essence, is the answer.
yeah. Just remember, I cannot give a short answer. I'm a professor.
I understand that probably better than anyone
I know,
at
your
this table.
husband.
And I guess that's the other piece of it, is while that's a popular thing to talk about, when I'm looking at how my police department in events per day. I would like to see you tell me where the most time is spent and whether or not you think that's an effective use of time, whether or not that particular item is a popular thing about which to speak.
Okay.
So, in my mind, you kind of missed the mark there, because I still don't know why investigations take more time than crime-related, other than I know there are different kinds of them. But that's not my decision to make. I think that that's kind of one of the sorts of things we were paying you to figure out. So, like I say, I think you kind of missed the mark in giving me the information I would have liked to have had.
Let me jump in here. Investigation is a very wide encompassing title, and involves, it can be house checks, it can be, suspicious incidents. It's not conducting an investigation. We for years have tried to come up with a better name for that, and we've never been able to find something that all the police departments we deal with kind of could coalesce around. So it is what it is. It's a bunch of things where officers are checking things out, if you will, not necessarily investigating. We could call it checking things out. And that's really what most of the police officers' time is spent in most cities, is just kind of checking things out. So the name doesn't actually represent what's going on. We've never come up with a better name.
Yeah, and a related issue is, unlike the fire service, America, the National Criminal Justice standard categories. That's why we start out with 230 categories. And there's zero value in producing a report with a list of 230, and here's how many you haven't reached. So we come up with some type of, I wouldn't say arbitrary, but some reasonable standard. We're sensitive to the local city when they say, in this case, they wanted more categories than less. And then we stick in the back just for the people who want to know. If you want to know what all 230 are, that's the best we can do. I mean, it's a challenge. And there is some talk that there will be a task force nationwide that will begin to try to come up with some type of standardized categorization. Because it's really absurd in this day and age to have 230 categories, which isn't so bad because the other city we look at had 1,200.
It's all relative.
And my son's job is to check every one of them and make sure it's actually aligned. You're the Dr. Chelsea.
Other questions? Councilman Howard?
How flexible is this organizational structure? Meaning if in the future the city has additional financial resources in which to deploy, or if the situation gets worse, how flexible is this model?
Well, very as flexible as it needs to be. I think what we presented is basically the template of a generalist, bare bones, reactive, somewhat proactive police department. So as it builds, you could either add more to each one of these boxes, or you could specialize as the case dictated.
So you would see this as, say, a core backbone, if you
correct.
Another item would be, what about the issue of overtime? And how do we compare both over our own history and to other departments?
I don't have that information.
Do you believe that this model will help us to deploy our department efficiently so as to keep that to a minimum?
No doubt. Looking at the coverage, there's always an overlap. Well, this is a little, and again, back to your point, Councilman, is that this actually needs to be adjusted to account for overlaps and change in tours. So this is just a kind of, a basic model. But this model, the way these are structured, almost eliminates the operational overtime at the end of a tour. Because if it's a half hour to go before the end of the shift, well, there's somebody always working that has 4 extra hours to go. So this model does the best job probably out there of minimizing that operational overtime.
So the goal would be to keep it to an event situation where you have a, say for example, a snowstorm or a major figure in the city.
Correct. Yeah. Correct. There's also some recommendations about the warrant process that can be streamlined. Weekend coverage, yes.
Now another question I have about the change agent, does that need to be an internal or an is it necessary that the individual be internal?
I think it should be. It's
Okay.
essential, in fact.
So then that would kind of demand that that individual be a higher ranking officer, okay?
With direct access to the chief.
So it sounds right way. All right. Now, in the report, there's a note about volunteerism, and I think it says that we have opportunities that haven't yet been maximized.
Sure.
And perhaps you could speak a little bit to that.
Well, again, volunteers, it takes as many tasks as you could give a volunteer, you could get a volunteer to do. I mean, there's just so many things that the police department can be doing with the community. Schools, the malls, traffic safety, the Citizens Police Academy. There's just, it's almost defies categorization because it's there. If you throw it out there, if you build it, they'll come. And I think the chief has mentioned already in our discussions that there is a kind of a thinking using the Citizens Police Academy as a way of building that capacity. So it's limitless, really.
I imagine the areas where the volunteers could be very effective would be in crime prevention and also in essentially getting information out into the community.
Exactly.
Any other questions, council members? Mayor Pro Tem Kerwin?
I'd like to go back to Clemens and the county, and this is for the chief. It was, I was distressed to read about the difficulty in inputting information in the Clemens. Just down the street, we know we have New World Systems, for example, and we know the advantage in Clemens is that it's county-wide, but we also know that New World Systems, in fact, does a lot with our putting right here and has the ability of doing some of those things. Do you feel, Chief, that you'll be able to move quickly enough with the county and Clemmis in terms of getting the ease of reporting that we really need? Or have you considered looking at a different way for that kind of input?
I'll answer the second part first, which is we have in the past looked at the New World system.
I'm just bringing them up randomly.
Okay. We have looked at other vendors in the past. You've articulated some of the benefits of Clemmis, which is we get a lot of our data, we get a lot of our crime analysis, the criminal information unit cited, and a lot of what we do is through the Clemmis system. It has a lot of very good points. The slowness of the system right now has frustrated police officers to the point that they lump all Clemmis into one. They look at it as one entity, and it's based on the slowness issue. They have assured us that this new method, that with the new records management system that they have, it was designed by bringing police officers in and having police officers work with the programmers to develop a system that works for them. They did this with the ticket writing system. This ticket writing system works good when it's running, when it's connected. But there's clearly connectivity issues. I'm not going to argue that point. And that's what needs to be. They are working on the records management system, the rewrite that's been out. I've been told by other officers that have looked at it, not from Troy. I didn't assign any Troy officers to this because we've done our share in helping Columbus get things implemented. We backed off, let someone else take a turn. So I haven't had any Troy officers work on that system where I can say, talking to my guys, I know. But talking to other officers, they're happy with this system. The proof will be in if it actually works. If it doesn't work, we'll be forced to start looking at other systems. There is budget issues with that because because we're partners with Clemmis, there's an economy of scale. It's very cost efficient. We would have to look at a more costly system. And then that would also take away a lot of the other systems besides the records management system, where our fingerprint system, our booking systems, the automatic fingerprints that officers can take in the road, the MDCs, all that is a package through Clemmis. So
Chief,
there definitely would be some
I
issues.
do understand that, and I know that we just, but this has never come up until I read the report.
Certainly. The officers are
second-
clearly frustrated.
Yeah.
We are working on,
And it contributes to the gray area on the
Yes, it
chart,
does.
which
It does.
we don't want. The other thing with the county, in addition to Clemmis, is what was brought up, and that's the overtime and the waiting in order to get a warrant. And I know that this county is so proud that for their technology, because that's something that's touted frequently, even in terms of the county executive's suggestion that people could film visits and so on. Surely, working with the county, there must be a way that this can be addressed so that we can be more efficient and effective.
We will work on that. It's, as has been pointed out, that's not a Troy problem.
It is not.
That's a countywide issue.
It is.
And
But
then
it
a lot of
does
it.
attribute to the overtime that was mentioned, and it does attribute to the gray area, which we don't want to see. And then it attributes to it looking like 40% of the time.
It's all part of the same factor, yes. I wouldn't argue.
Thank you.
Anybody else have questions? Council members?
So imagine this will be edited a bit.
Yeah, what we'll do is we'll make those changes and then I'll send it electronically to the city manager and to the individual post on the websites.
Okay.
Just one more funny thing on a page. I guess I'll see you at the break.
Pardon?
I'll just tell them at a break.
Oh, okay.
There are a couple.
I do want to indicate that I don't know if staff has indicated to you gentlemen or not, but after you gave us part one of the report, council members immediately saw some things that they could do. You had suggestions for us, and one of them was the community outreach, and so we've had begun the sessions of community conversations, which are occurring and ongoing through this month, and we're also doing the phone. Target Insight, which is going to occur, I believe, next week.
I never get things on time. I'm told
Okay.
April 15th.
We
We'll
need
see
to
what
get
the
it
final
back
plan
by
comes in.
April 15th? Okay.
That's what I'm indicating.
To get more input from the general population, so we are, in addition to staff doing things, council themselves, and we gave you our vision and goals statement, things of that nature, so we appreciate that. And I know you appreciate the concerns and questions that council has when they read the report, because we read it from different viewpoints, from, you know, the citizen who is maybe just looking at it for the first time, for those that have looked at a lot of things that have to do with the police department, and from some of those that have been very involved in police enforcement. So I think that that's, you know, we're doing a critical look. I know you've done reports in other communities on things, and so we appreciate the fact that you have a lot of experience in doing this.
Your comments are in line with the kind of experience we have on this. I think Leonard could tell you that inevitably, when you do detailed data analysis, interpretation, and you couple it with operations analysis, there are things that pop out that everyone interprets it slightly differently, and then we have to interpret for you. Every so often there's a typo, as it happens tonight, and it's a critical issue, but it gets fixed. we want to make sure that as a client, you're satisfied with the report and it meets your needs. So I don't think there's anything that came up tonight that is insurmountable or is something that we wouldn't have anticipated you commenting on. So we're happy to work with you.
That's good.
Mayor, I'd like to just kind of summarize something for you. My job these days is really to go visit cities that are in terrible financial predicaments and help them figure out how to deal with public safety and with limited resources. So, and I can assure you that what you're going through here is not the worst that we've seen. In the past couple of months, I've been actively involved with the Bureau of Justice Assistance and the COPS Office and the Bureau of Criminal Justice Institute in New York City and a couple of other national organizations looking at these issues. And one of the things that we see consistently is that cities have been able to successfully downsize their police departments and still be able to provide excellent service levels to the community. Jim, who's a retired inspector out of NYPD, and I were talking tonight about New York City announced today that they are going to reduce the size of their police department to the lowest level that it's been at in 20 years. And yet every year they have lower crime rates, higher citizen satisfaction, and they do that because of good management. You have good management people in place here. You have a good organization in place. I don't have any doubt that you can accomplish this. And one of the things that people are finding, interestingly enough, is that when these departments downsize and they stop doing some things that they were doing, they rarely hear from the public about it. My experience, having been a police chief and a city manager, is a lot of times we in government think that people want some things that they don't necessarily want. And we try, the example being on response times. You know, we always thought back in the old days that you had to get there fast, even if it was a minor bicycle stolen report. It turns out the public doesn't really, that doesn't bother them if it takes them a few minutes longer to get there. So my point is that I think that you have the opportunity here to accomplish this, do it successfully, have the city protected, and still maintain high levels of citizen satisfaction. We look at a lot of other cities in a lot worse predicament than you're in, and they've been able to do it, and I'm sure that you can do it with the leadership you have here.
Did I see you signaling, Councilman Beltrame?
Just a final comment, and I'm pleased that some of the things that have become not only signature activities here, but safety nets for the community were either put back or restructured into this new structure, and I was tickled to see that. As long as you are reprinting. For those of us,
rewriting, not reprinting, rewriting.
For those of us who are visual learners, the fact that in your pie charts, your colorization is inconsistent from unit to unit, from chart to chart, makes it difficult to assimilate that information. And in the electronic copy that you sent, the colors of figures 6 through 9, the greens were exactly reversed so that they did not match up with the verbiage. They're right in this final copy, but they were... copy, so if that's what you're using as your base, I wanted to let you know that that doesn't work either. So, those are.
So one of
as
the
I said-
things is, the last time I had this problem, I was in Toyohashi, Japan, and I loaded up my presentation. I was talking to Toyota. That's my other job. And I said, thank God Toyota is more consistent in the quality than Microsoft is in terms of its software products. You know, it's very hard when you use Excel and you say, I want to create a chart, and you make any changes, short of going in and saying, I want to color code it, it's not, you know, we'll check and see how easy it is to do. I don't particularly know.
I'm not looking for you to tell me I'll do it if it's easy or not.
No, no.
I'm looking for you to tell me that, yes, ma'am, thank you very much. I mean, quite honestly, this is not useful to me at all.
The words
Councilman-
have to match the chart.
Councilman Fleming, I saw you signaling you wanted to say something.
You responded to Councilman Howlick's question about volunteers, and you said basically it's infinite. But what I would like to see in the report, if you could, based on what you've seen with this department and other departments, where you might highly recommend some volunteer involvement. It could be in assistance with report writing, if citizens have to come in and do reports. But if you could maybe give us a
Not a
listing,
problem.
because I know there's going to be a committee looking at it, but based on
A head start with experiences in other places.
yes, that would be helpful, because
Not a
I think
problem.
we're going to really have to rely on the volunteers in this community, and I think you're right, they're there, they will come. But if you can give us a little more direction in that area, I think it would save
Not a problem.
the meeting some time.
And in all, the reason why I didn't do that, because it's
It's, yeah,
just, you know, whatever you want it to be, but that's not a problem.
thank you.
Okay, council, do you wish to go right to public comment, or you want to take a break and then do public comment? How do you want to do that? I'm seeing different signals here. The clock is incorrect again.
A break.
Right? Okay, we had at least half the people requesting a 5-minute break, and then we'll come back and take public comment, okay?